Hey, everybody, this is Jess Cagle. Welcome to a cast special with the cast of this show that I've been talking about for, I think, months now. It's absolutely extraordinary. Fellow Travelers. It is on Showtime and Paramount Plus. It's airing right now. Already getting all kinds of Emmy buzz. New episodes of Fellow Travelers, if you're watching, available Fridays with Paramount Plus with Showtime. And here with me, and I'm so glad. First of all, I'm so glad that they can finally talk about this thing because the strike is over and they're out and about. I have the executive producer and star of Fellow Travelers, his co-star in Fellow Travelers. First of all, you know him from White Collar, Magic Mike, The Normal Heart, The Boys in the Band, and now Fellow Travelers, Matt Bomer.
Hey, Jess. It's good to
Thank
see
you for being. Is it great,
me.
especially as you're an executive producer on it? Also, so great to be able to talk about it finally.
As a producer, yes, it is fantastic to be able to talk about it. As an actor, I was kind of happy just letting the work be out there, you know, and let the work be the work, you know. But they got us out here tap dancing now, and it feels good. It's so great to be with Johnny, and yeah, it's especially as a producer to get to talk about the project.
And also tap dancing.
I mean, who doesn't want to do a time step?
Also with us, Bridgerton Broadchurch, company on the West End, one of the greatest performances I've ever seen on stage.
Oh, that's very kind.
And now,
You're here.
in Fellow Travelers, it's just extraordinary. Jonathan Bailey.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Normally you live in the UK, right?
I do, yeah.
Have you been traipsing around the States, though, for a while for this?
Well, no, Monday was, so 5 days ago was my first ever interview in America. So despite the experience of Bridgerton, I managed to not have to do any press in America because it was all on Zoom. So it's been an amazing week to come back and share.
Like I said, this is just an extraordinary. It's an epic love story. There's the two men who work for the government. They meet in the 1950s during the Red Scare. And then they both get swept up into the Lavender Scare, which was a government campaign to destroy gay men, lesbians, LGBTQ people who worked for the government in the 1950s. And then the series is an epic love story. Then it spans 30 years. Created by Ron Neiswaner. Also, besides Matt Bomer and Jonathan Bailey, Allison Williams is in it, Chris Bauer, Jelani Aladdin, Noah Ricketts. Just an incredible cast. I want to start with asking both of you how you got involved with this. And I'll start with you, Matt, because I know that you've been involved with this project for a really long time.
I want to say it's about 3.5 years now. I was very fortunate during the pandemic. Robbie Rogers and Ron Neiswaner reached out to me. They mentioned the book, and they gave me a brief synopsis. I thought it sounded fascinating. I knew nothing about the Lavender Scare. I'd only ever heard about it briefly when Pete Buttigieg discussed it during an interview on a talk show, I think. And I read the book in about 3 days and just said, yes, we have to do this. And we then went about the process of trying to get a studio and a director and a network and all those things. And we were just so fortunate. I mean, I'm still pinching myself that this show was able to be made. There were so many incredible gatekeepers at Showtime and Fremantle who just gave us license to tell the story as authentically as we could. And I'm beyond grateful.
I hate to say this because it makes it sound like broccoli, but it's an important story to tell. It truly is. I mean, we live in a time when, there are 19 states where you can be fired for being gay. A time when, trans kids and trans people are made fun of on the House floor, particularly at this time. And for you, Matt, was it that your reasoning behind getting this made, was it that you really wanted to play Hawkins Fuller, who's just one of the most interesting characters that you'll ever see on television? Or was it, I want to get this story told because this period of time, really, we do need to be reminded of it?
I think if you're lucky, once in a career, maybe all those things conspire into one project. I felt that it was, I don't like to necessarily use the word important, but I thought it was a story that I felt needed to be out there because it was so educational for me and reading it. And obviously the character of Hawk was just so dynamic and unlike anything I'd ever done. And I think as an actor, you're always trying to just kind of toe that line of, can I do this? is it possible for me to do this? And it was terrifying for me, just the thought of playing that role. So I thought maybe I should just follow that and see where it leads. But I think holistically, it was much more important just to have this story out in the world.
And Jonathan, when this project came to you, how much did you know about this period of American history?
Not much at all. The landscape, I think, drew me in, but it's the character dynamic between Tim and Hawke and the inclusion of the of Noah and Jelani's storyline and the intersection of civil rights and the queer liberation, which is something that I was more attuned to over the last sort of 5 years, talking about civil rights. And that I found really interesting and fascinating. When I saw that in the script, I was like, this is going to be special. And yeah, I spoke to Ron and Dan Minahan for about an hour on Zoom, and I was overwhelmed with Ron's soul and his life experience that he poured into it. And, you know, for anyone who's read the book, the way he's enriched and expanded that source material is so particular and to himself and to his experience. And it was clear to me that there was, not only was Matt going to be there, and he was already well on board, but Dan Minahan and the three other directors that they were at that time talking about getting on board. I knew it was such an opportunity to pour your own personal experiences into it. And I think that's why it's special, beyond just being vital because of the story it's telling, but it's the landscape and the stakes that the characters are surviving in. Allow them, you know, the character study to be that much deeper and richer.
I know when I mentioned Company a minute ago on the West End, where you won an Olivier for it. I know in your speech, you talked, I don't know if you used the word representation, but you talked about how that gave a snapshot of gay life. And that was very important to you. And at this particular time in our culture and in British culture that we're in now, that was important to you. And what was it about the character of Tim, who you play, that you felt was crucial for people to see?
I knew what I thought was fascinating about Tim is that I'd never seen... I wanted to explore the sort of the pain and the discomfort in his own skin, and that I'd seen these sorts of characters that were sort of doe-eyed, soft, and sort of overly generous characters, and I just felt with him instinctively that he was a really complicated character, and also it was a complete 180 from Anthony Bridgerton, and that, you know, more than anything is a great thrill to be able to go from a straight lead to a gay romance, and to bring as many Bridgerton fans along with, you know, for the ride as you can. And that to me feels political. I think anyone who accepted this job, anyone who greenlit this job, anyone who's watching this job, and anyone who's supporting this story, it's a political act. And that feels to me always the most grounding thing when choosing work and stories to tell.
For anybody that hasn't caught up with the show yet, I want to back up just a little bit. And I've said what it's about. It's this epic love story from the 50s to the 80s during the AIDS crisis. It goes from the Lavender Scare to the AIDS crisis along the way. It's the 70s, the Vietnam protests of the 60s and 70s. And I want to talk about the men themselves and start with Hawkins Fuller, Matt, who is this guy who seems to have no ideology. He's just a survivor and really wants the perfect American life, and yet has a double life. And he seems to be comfortable with that, not burdened too much by shame, but very, very troubled deep down. And somehow you make him sympathetic, which is not the most important thing in the world to make characters sympathetic, but he is. You really feel for him, and yet he does some bad things.
I've always felt that he does what it takes to survive, so I think that's a great launching point. But I feel like so much of that is in the writing, thanks to Ron. He is a character who has been deeply traumatized in his past, both through his family and through the war. And he's figured out a way to survive and thrive in a world and a society that doesn't want him to do either of those things. So he's compartmentalized his life in such a way to succeed and fly just under the radar enough to have the exact life he wants, ending up in Italy. But at the same time, there's a little bit of an FU underneath it all. to government, to society at large. Am I allowed to say any of that?
What does that stand for, Matt?
He also has this great rosebud in this character of Kenny, which was sort of his first love, and this deeply traumatic incident between his father and Kenny happened, and then that was compounded by another traumatic incident, and I think that has sort of really shaped the level of control he needs in relationships and love as well. And I think Tim is the first person who really calls that into question.
Jonathan, let's talk about Tim, who we come to know in the first episode as Skippy, which is what Hawk calls him, and it's really a perfect name because he is that doe-eyed young guy.
He is. I know Skippy as the kangaroo from Down Under. Did you have that growing
I
up?
didn't have that.
No, that's
Is
who I based
that a
it
British
on.
thing?
No, it was an Australian.
Oh, an Australian.
Yeah, an
Your
Australian
character's
kangaroo.
animal, a kangaroo?
Yeah, I think it must be. A tiny little Joey in a pouch. Tim goes on a journey, doesn't he? It's interesting hearing, talking about Hawk and about it's that fascinating human condition that in romance, more often than not, people are drawn to the absolute antithesis of the people that remind them of their mortal sort of wound. And the fact that Tim is drawn to Hawk and Hawk is drawn to Tim is because, they have complete different choices in the way that they survive. And, both are, equally justifiable, but he cannot understand how people can compartmentalize. And I thought the investigation of religion, to me, felt really pertinent and fascinating because Tim is someone who needs to believe, and he has such a huge amount of faith that then is questioned and sabotaged by the world around him and the people that he's in love with, and that just gives a huge character arc which I was thrilled to dive into and slightly overwhelmed by. But yeah, their constant cycle is one of two people that are desperate for the other person to fill the void that they're feeling, and they're never going to be able to do that because it's hardwiring. And I think it's a really interesting also observation on queerness and about being othered and about how you do, it's really, really hard to sort of heal within those high stakes. And, it's just a crazy time, isn't it? The Lavender Scare, and what these people, they were the original activists, really, and just getting through a day alive was activism, really.
We keep talking about Ron. It's Ron Nicewaner, and he wrote Philadelphia. He created the show, wrote a lot of it himself. And again, there's a historical backdrop and real historical events and real historical people like Joe McCarthy that appear in this, but it's also a really personal story to Ron as well, and I'm sure to both of you. With Skippy, he's a former seminary student who comes to Washington, and he's a true believer. Like, he really believes that Joe McCarthy is doing God's work by rooting out the communists.
Yeah.
And he's in for some severe disillusionment.
I know. I don't know what's more naive, that or him drinking milk.
And he drinks a lot of milk.
And he continues to drink milk throughout. That's maybe the only consistent thing.
But he's what struck me about him, and you mentioned it a second ago, it's impossible for him to compartmentalize because in so many ways, even though he's young and idealistic and naive, he's also incredibly brave, and in a lot of ways braver than Hawk, who I guess has more to lose, right? I mean, Tim just has no money, he has no career yet.
Yeah, that's true. And I suppose, Hawk, what gets Hawk to the place that he's in when you meet him is the very thing that sort of undoes him in the end, really, because it doesn't allow him to sort of grow as a person. But of course, people like Tim, he dismantles the world and the options that are given to him, and he questions and he challenges himself and everyone around him. And they're the people who really do make waves in progression. But then, there are always people who are surviving from the inside. And I think it's just a really brilliant, a love story between two people who are so opposed.
There's a cost to both things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because he's, I think, blessed him. He's sort of a free electron that never really Well, you'll have to wait and see. We're only the season.
Yeah, don't want to get too far ahead for anybody that hasn't seen it all yet. The lavender scare and the historical backdrop of that. Can I, Matt? What were the aspects of that? I mean, it all really started, the fear of the other. In Washington, D.C., really started when, after World War II, all kinds of people came to Washington, D.C. Leftists, homosexuals, all of that kind of rolled in. And there was this fear of that. And it really crystallized in 1950 when Joseph McCarthy made this up, clearly, decided that there were a whole bunch of communists running around.
Yeah. And basically in 53, to kind of expound on that, McCarthy and Roy Cohn convinced Eisenhower to push through an executive order banning sexual deviance from government because they were perceived as morally weak and impressionable, so that they would be more likely to succumb to influence from a Red. And that ended up eliminating an estimated 10,000 jobs in government. Multiple people took their lives, cost all kinds of people their careers.
Jonathan, was it, as somebody who had not been steeped in that, or casually heard other Americans refer to it when you were growing up, when you dived into that part of American history, was it shocking to you? Was it, what is wrong with these people?
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, and I think through the microcosm of 50s America and the Lavender Scare, you can unlock an understanding of what the way that people live now. There are so many people in the world that are still living under that sort of regime and belief system. So that, to me, I was looking also for something personally that would just expand my understanding of who I am and the world we live in. And starting in the 50s and going all the way through to the 80s, there's just no other way of understanding that sort of movement. But yeah, I mean, it's shocking and it was depressing, to be honest, to stay with that. And I think we managed to find the moments of joy, which is something that Ron emphasised. And the intimacy between the two characters is like going to battle to find the joy, to find the connection, to find the very thing that could only balance out the extraordinary bleakness of what that Lavender Scare brought about in terms of human existence. So yeah, it was fascinating, and I've definitely changed. I mean, I haven't changed as a person, but I learned so much from Ron and from and for playing these two characters. And I think Tim will stay with me for my life. It's such an infectious thing to play a character who's always striving for truth and through kindness and connection.
While we're talking about the historical backdrop, there is the Joe McCarthy, Roy Cohn storyline that goes through this. Matt, can you touch on that a little bit? Like, who was Roy Cohn to him, and then how did David Schine come into play here?
Roy Cohn was his lawyer who helped him obviously kind of maneuver through the government and point out all the Reds, obviously. He was a closeted gay man, which made it all the more tragic and sad. He's played brilliantly by Will Brill, I think, on the show. What else were you asking me?
One of the strangest things about, the entire Joseph McCarthy thing is just bizarre.
Yeah.
But one of and it ultimately was their undoing, and it's kind of a jumping off point for a narrative within the series. But the David Schine character, who seems to have a hold over Roy Cohn.
Who Roy is completely enamored with and is trying to relieve of his military duty. And David Schine comes from this hotelier family, comes from this sort of American aristocracy, and is kind of willing to use Roy's affections to try to get himself out of military service.
And tell me about your scenes with Chris Bauer and Will. Like, it was because Jonathan, your Skippy is working for them.
Yeah.
And I would just think would be incredibly uncomfortable for anyone to be near anyone who's pretending to be Roy Cohn and Joseph McCarthy.
Yeah, and in two very different ways, incredibly intimidating. But yeah, Chris Bauer's phenomenal. Yeah. And Christine, who played Jean, was, it was amazing. But yeah, I mean, the fact that, he's described with having everyone talks about Joe McCarthy's hands, and he was very handsy. Well, there's no one who's got, kinder and softer, but huge hands. That's Chris Bauer.
Paws. Yeah.
His big bear
I know
paws.
when he paws Skippy a little bit.
Yeah, he needs him like dough. But it's the multiple different ways in which, also even Roy Cohn is being held and manipulated because of his, presumed sexuality. But the way that the corruption and even that world pushed these people together to operate in as they do as a trio is it's just terrifying, all of it. And the fact that they're ruling with their self-hatred over, it's a brilliant. That's why I think, I know you were saying that, just the understanding of how those three characters work is enough for a 8-hour sort of miniseries.
Yes. That could be the spinoff.
It could be. And I think, who knows? It might be.
We don't know in real life. We don't know in real life what Joseph McCarthy's sexual orientation was. There are indications that he may have also been closeted.
That's why I was dancing around that question.
No, it's we
comment on that or not.
But the series definitely comments
The
on it.
series
doesn't it?
does.
And there's hard
The series
facts.
makes an assumption, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's worth going down a rabbit hole to figure,
Well, it's also where do you
find
stop,
out.
because then what is the investigation of queer closeted leaders, acting out their own shame on, that's even a different level of
oh my God. Yeah.
torture and bleakness.
There is a great speech, though, that McCarthy gives to Skippy about how he found traction as a senator that is based on truth, because he wasn't a popular senator. And it wasn't until he figured out a way to create this sort of divisive, sort of righteous mentality that he was able and rhetoric that he was able to gain the ground he needed to have that power he had in government.
It's also that horrible thing of, the queer community, I think, have always been used really and exploited to swing votes. And that's something that we're seeing now. So, that's, I think, going back and seeing the kernel of that, of where we're at now, is really interesting.
The Allison Williams character is just also like all of those people in Hawk's orbit. It's the woman who's in love with him, who he decides to marry. She seems to have some understanding of what she's getting into. Can you tell me about their dynamic?
Well, I do think at the base of it is real love and affection for each other. It's a different kind of love. But Senator Smith, Lucy's father, has sort of preordained that they will be together at some point.
And Senator Smith was kind of a surrogate father almost to Hawk,
yes, he
and
is
wants
Hawk's
Hawk and his daughter.
Surrogate father. So Hawk ends up cementing that fatherly relationship by marrying his daughter, played by the brilliant Linus Roach, and not the daughter, the father. And Allison Williams plays Lucy, and it's interesting having done Maestro before this, which really focuses on Leonard Bernstein's marriage to Felicia Montalegre, because it was a generation of people who had a genuine love and affection for each other, consummate love and affection for each other, but also made some sacrifices and allowed certain space in the relationship for whatever else their lifestyle might be, or whatever else their sexual preference or choices might be. And both pieces actually kind of explore the cost of that and what living that life, the toll that it can take on a couple living that life. And I think the way that Lucy's storyline arcs through the 8 episodes is really beautiful. She really gets to go on an incredible, for lack of a better word, journey.
I knew the word journey was coming. Yeah, I knew it was because it's an important journey.
Listen, if it's 4 decades, you're allowed to say journey, okay? If it's 1 year, maybe not. And I think Allison just plays it so brilliantly. Particularly episode 6, for me, with her, is just a phenomenal performance, and it was so great. Honestly, one of the real privileges of getting to be a part of this was watching the work that Johnny would bring to each time period, and also watching the work that Allison would bring to each time period. I didn't want to see them in their costumes and hair and makeup until we were on the set that day in that period, and it was just so inspiring, and I still kind of get chills thinking about it, seeing the brilliant choices they had made with their characters as the years went on.
I always get nervous in anything that spans a lot of time periods because I'm worried that there's going to be a bad wig. And there wasn't a bad wig in this one.
Phew. That's out to Michelle.
Michelle Cote, amazing hair artist. Yes. The coincidental thing is that now Michelle is doing a piece on Roy Cohn and McCarthy,
Oh, yeah,
right? Or
that's
something like
bizarre,
that.
yeah.
So I just envisioned her like just pulling these wigs off the shelf and just like shaking them out, dusting them off, putting on a little toupee tape, and just on to the next one.
Inverting the fake
No, they were
nose on the
good.
thumb.
Keep recycling them. What was it like, Jonathan? We talked about the different time periods. Maybe you shot in order, maybe you didn't. But in whatever the situation was, the show does go back and forth in time. We start in the 50s, but then we go to the 80s when Jonathan is not well. We see that we just don't know how they got there. And that's the, pleasure and the surprises that I don't want to give anything away. But what was it like? How do you keep track of where you are in a character's, for lack of a better word, journey before shooting?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard. I don't know really how to talk about the process of it, but all I can say is that I felt sort of, you just have to keep yourself really emotionally open. I just sort of, I don't know, it's something weird happened. It was an instinctive thing. And I think I knew that the real nervous dive, it was free fall, but knowing that where Tim starts on the bench scene and then the first scene in the 80s, I knew that once those tent pegs were in, then you just go from there. But I just sort of understood, I don't know really what happened, but I think once I'd filmed the 80s scene of when Hawk comes into to see him and he's lying on the sofa, I think that was the first time we went into the 80s. And it was kind of wild because the set design was extraordinary, and all the, with Michelle and Ori who did my makeup, there was so much work that was surrounding the character and what we were doing, and then you turn up and you see it and you go, wow, this is Tim's apartment. And obviously I had a couple of conversations about what I thought would be in evidence there, but you free fall, and the bigger the reach of a story, the more complex a dynamic and a character that you're playing, the more you have to take that leap. But I think then what happens is you can really lose that self-consciousness because you can't control it. And I remember when we were in the 70s, which is a bit of a spoiler, but I was I remember that day because that was filmed within sort of episodes 6 and 7 were filmed very, very quickly because they were quite small locations. And so doing a whole decade in 4 days was wild. And I remember that first day we shot a scene which is when Tim and Hawk meet again in the 70s. And I sat by the pool outside and I just said, I looked at Ron. And we really sort of didn't talk. Like Skippy existed between me and Ron in like this weird orb that we sort of both trusted. But I just looked at him and I was like, I don't know. I actually, I'm a little bit nervous. I just don't know. Got sounding incredibly British. But and he just said, that's not your problem. That's nothing for you to worry about. That's my job.
That was my favorite Tim look.
Woof.
Yeah.
What was it about that look? In the 70s. Spoiler alert.
Honestly,
It was Wigfield.
It was Wigfield. It was all Wigfield. So hopefully she dusts Wigfield off again. But no, it was, I think that was the first time we were out of the 80s and the 50s. So I think part of it was the novelty of seeing that and the mustache, your hair, and just I could see the level of maturity that he had gained as a human in his performance. And it was just, I was so maybe just blown away by the talent as well. And,
What lies beneath.
But
it was a real moment, isn't it, where I think Hawk and Tim's grow, where they are at in their journeys.
Yes, I mean,
it really flips.
That was the episode we really had to jump off a cliff together.
Yeah. And we were sort of holding hands all the way through, which was great.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How much conversation would the two of you have before jumping into something?
With Matt and I?
Yeah, the two of you, or was there a lot of conversation?
Do you know, not really. I think we had an amazing chat on Cumberland Avenue at
Goldstruck Coffee.
Which both of those names make me laugh.
Yes.
for obvious reasons. But so and then we spoke about what we were about to embark on in terms of the nature of the story, and I think we just sort of clicked in, and we just vowed to support each other as much as we could. But then I think what works for the two of them is that these characters, what you see them, how they interact with each other versus how they're actually feeling is rarely in line, I think, which is amazing until they have these beautiful moments of sort of togetherness and sort of where they're symbiotic in their post-intimate sort of orb, as I like to say it. So actually it sort of worked in our favour to not overthink, I think. And we didn't really even run scenes or anything like that. And it just felt alive in that way. And Matt's so brilliant that, it just was so easy to trust that you just turn up. And there was one day though, in episode 4 where I took a Benadryl. Do you remember?
Oh, you had another.
I had a bite. Yeah, someone they were like having a bite. So the medic came in, and it was a medic that he came in and was like, "We need a Benadryl," and I've taken Benadryl before. That day. Well, no one knows who this guy is. He's never been seen again.
He's never been seen again.
He wasn't really a medic.
But Benadryl in the UK is not drowsy, and I've got hay fever, so I've taken it. I took 2, and as we were getting ready for the big scene in the kitchen. Do you remember with the peanut butter?
Yes.
My eyes started rolling in the back of my head. There's a reason to the story, which is saying how much you can trust another actor.
Yes.
Because then I was in my trailer, and Robbie came out. I sort of came too, and he was like, we can't go ahead. And I was like, I can't leave the crew waiting. And so we went on set, and then we got through that. And if you can get through a big high octane emotional scene like that, whilst sort of passing out, that just shows how brilliant you can trust your.
And how did Dan Minahan and the directors or the intimacy coordinator, whoever was sort of responsible for this, make you both comfortable for the sex scenes? Because sex is a big part of the relationship.
So much of it is in the great writing in the script, I have to say, and just understanding the characters. We did have an intimacy coordinator who was able to help facilitate things, make sure things were comfortable. I think there's such a tremendous value on set because I've been doing this a while now, and I've been through many scenes going back to 2000, 2001, when it would have been nice to have somebody there to just talk through things with. But a lot of it was, like Johnny mentioned, just the trust and the work we'd done on the characters and hopefully the understanding of the dynamics they had that were really an external expression of so many things they were struggling with inside. I think that was kind of the key to their connection in a lot of ways. And just hoping that when the cameras are rolling, we could trust each other enough to just let it happen in the moment and not try to preordain it or overly choreograph anything, but make it feel alive and like it's happening for the first time when they're filming.
In much like I think the best acting is always about listening. It feels like the physical intimacy was based on
it was a conversation.
It was a conversation and eye contact. I think that's where the real intimacy of the sex scenes in this show, because you can see from the get-go the way that they communicate, what they're constantly trying to see with the green light, what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, what pleases the other person. That is a huge thing, I think, to explore over 4 decades. But I think we very quickly I think also we've probably both had quite helpful experiences with intimacy scenes before, and we've seen how that's changed over the last 15 years, and the inclusion of having someone on set who can.
It's gotten better.
So so much better. And in this instance, I think actually we felt like we probably did a lot of the work ourselves in terms of negotiating and chatting, but it's great that there's just someone there that can just appease everyone, because it's not just about how we feel, it's about the people on set. And therefore, hopefully I think it allows people at home to enjoy it a bit more. I don't know how, but it sort of bleeds through. This to me feels exactly the sort of intimacy that I've always wanted to see on screen. So I'm so proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, what struck me about it is it's very attention-getting. It's very frank. You don't often see it, particularly between two men. And but none of it felt gratuitous. It never felt that way, even though it's shocking in some ways to see it. But you said something, Matt, about how it does reflect, because sometimes it's rough, sometimes it's tender, it's a little kinky, but never in a campy way. But you said it sort of, their interactions physically sort of reflect what's going on inside of them emotionally. And can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a lot of when I was talking about Hawk before, the fact that he'd had this horrific experience with his father and his first love, and this traumatic experience in the war that gave him a perspective where he always felt that he'd be letting anyone who loved him down, that the cost of loving him would be someone's life. That's kind of his greatest fear. And so he has these tremendous obstacles to true intimacy and this tremendous need to also control and to be in control of what's going on. And I think buried within that is also when he finds somebody great like Tim, hoping that pleases that person as well. Does that explain it?
No, it does make sense that he needs to be in control. There's also an anger that comes through.
Of course, he's got a tremendous amount of anger towards his father and the establishment, as it were. He has a great speech where, he goes off on government, God, all of it. I think he's called a lot of that into question in his life.
And for Skippy, the subservient, but also very much in control. Like he knows, he's somehow aware of his power, despite
he has that incredible chemical awakening in that first interaction.
Yeah.
And also, I think for Skippy, his intimacy is exploded by truth and honest conversation. And they have that conversation. I think probably for the first time, he talks about his first experience. Asks that of Hawk, doesn't get it, but it's through that conversation that suddenly he goes, let's explore it, and then he does quickly sit in his power. But I do think there's something also about gay men and women coming together, or gay people. Like it's the experience of what it is to see these sexual acts on screen is so important, because yes, it's provocative, and yes, people will talk about it, but then what? It's actually showing the level of the sort of chemical supernova of what it is in that environment to come together and to achieve what most people would be able to have without question, of a level of intimacy and validation and soothing in that, in that sexual act. And also for anyone who has historically people, gay men, I think, have had a really bad time of being written off as being animalistic in the way that they meet and have sex with each other. But I'm hoping this show will allow people to understand that, these cottaging and the toilet, they're the only places that they could go to meet these people. And actually everyone should be able to have sex with the people that they want to, obviously within consent. And so that to me feels like why it's so important to then give the audience an experience which is similar to what Skippy experiences, which is this overwhelming, shocking, hopefully euphoric explosion, which is what I think that's where it starts between them.
Release.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's a critical exploration. I think it's,
We look back on these things and we think they're so far away, but you look at Lawrence versus Texas, which took place in 2003, which overturned the sodomy laws in Texas, which meant that up until 2003, which is 20 years ago, you couldn't have intimate relations with someone of your own gender in the same home, inside the safety of your own home.
Yeah.
Well, the executive order that you mentioned that Eisenhower, on Joe McCarthy's urging, signed in 1953, was not repealed until 2017.
What?
Yeah, it wasn't actually repealed until 2000. There were a lot of court challenges along the way. It was defanged in some ways, but wasn't repealed until 2017.
Yeah, we still stand in the shadows, don't we?
Yeah. You're both very busy. How did the production of Fellow Travelers fit into, in your case, Matt, with Maestro, that you're also in, that's coming out soon? How did the production schedules work?
I think I finished principal photography on Maestro maybe 3 weeks before my first scene on Fellow Travelers. But I lived with the script for a while.
Yeah.
Different iterations of it over the years. And then I think I did 96 of 100 days on Fellow Travelers, which is pretty wild. But 2 of the days that I had off, 2 I got off for Thanksgiving. The other 2 I had to go back and do to New York and do additional photography on Maestro. But
Had you messed something up and had to go
no,
back?
no, it was additional photography, not a reshoot, thankfully.
I figured.
And it was a pleasure to get to go do. And I remember being so nervous about it. And Johnny was so consoling to me. He was like, you're in the zone, like you're in the pocket.
Yeah, you're
You've been working
sharp.
80 hours a week. Like,
Yeah.
you can do this. And it was such good counsel at the time. But really, I can't complain. Johnny is the one who was commuting. You tell him, Johnny. I mean, he had like 3 jobs at one time.
Yeah, I mean, it was a wild end of the year. But yeah, I mean, I was lucky that so many. Actually, my gratitude to assistants, as in people who can help, but also to producers for allowing that to happen. I was still filming Bridgerton, and they allowed me to go off, and I was still on first call to them. So, everyone at Fremantle and Showtime managed to work around that schedule. And then I started rehearsing Wicked as well, so I was doing, I mean, I did 33
What is
days in a row.
Wicked? I'm kidding.
No, it's this tiny little indie.
musical that
Yeah.
nobody has
There
heard
was
of.
one day when the trailer, it was an off day. We were like doing a promo shoot or something, and the trailer was shaking, and I was like, "Whoa, what's going on?" Because we shared a trailer, and I was like, "What's going on?" And he was like, "I was practicing my choreography for Wicked." I was like, "This is amazing."
Yeah.
It's such a testament to Johnny's talent that he was so in that world and so invested in that world, then so invested in Little Bridgerton, but then showed up in such a profound way for fellow travelers too.
Well,
you would never know that he was shooting 3 things at the same time.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I mean, I think at the end of it, I left at 4 a.m. I think on a Saturday morning.
Yes.
And I was for a scene in the shower in episode 6, and I left and I was on set, I think, at a Regency Ball within 18 hours playing Anthony Bridgerton. And I think at that point, I didn't really have space to grieve.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you do. I think with this sort of story and the characters that we play, I was so moved by it. And I remember at the end, I'm not someone who usually gives speeches or feels comfortable with speeches in any way, but I really felt that I was going to say something at the end of the shoot, but it was like 4:30 in the morning. And the crew were desperate to go home, and I'd lost my voice because I'd been screaming in the shower, and I was just like, I just want to say, it's been extraordinary.
I'm sorry, I can't stop thinking, did you barge into that trailer and make him perform Dancing Through Life for you?
I think the reality
show
of
me
it.
something.
No, I don't know. I just came out with a sweatband.
You were
really
popping and
tired.
locking. It was great. Yeah, it was amazing.
It's very hard choreography, too.
It's amazing choreography. Chris Scott. I mean, the treats that are in store.
Yeah. Can't wait.
Yeah.
Cannot wait.
Well, you've had the spoilers through the wall.
Yes. And they were good spoilers.
I have so many other questions for you here. We're almost out of time. Both of you, what were you like in high school? Particularly you, Jonathan. You started working very, very early.
I did, yeah.
As an actor, and you actually started in high school acting as well. But when you weren't working, you were just in high school, going to class, wanting to get invited to the party. What were you like? What were
such a good
Jonathan
question.
Bailey and Matt Bomer like in high school?
Well, I think a lot of my understanding of Hawk and the stakes of his life come from my life in high school, or what I perceived my life to be in high school, because it was sort of a Friday Night Lights town. The football game on Friday night was the social option, and I felt that if I was authentic to myself, then I wouldn't survive, whether that meant my life or whether that meant socially, whether that meant within my family. So the stakes for me were life and death in high school. I know that's a very dramatic thing to say, but that's how it felt to me. And, you're a teenager, you're going through a lot of things. So I had kind of compartmentalized my life in a way. I was, I bifurcated, really. I was a football player, but also did the musical, but kind of floated amongst social groups. I think I was a generally affable person who kind of got along with everybody, didn't make too much noise, and just thankfully when I was 18 started working in the professional theater there in Houston, and got a scholarship so that I could go to performing arts school, and then just tried to get to a place where I found a tribe where I could be my most authentic self.
What were you, Jonathan?
Well, I mean,
what were you like?
I mean, no surprises really, but at 11, I remember saying to my friends, I was like, does anyone else think they're gay? Like, do you guys at boys' school? I was like, is this a normal thing? Obviously, it went quiet, and I didn't think much of it. And then 3 years later, word got around, and it was just a day changed at school. And we had CCF, which is where you go off and you do like Army, Navy, and the Royal Air Force, and the boys had gone off on this coach, and obviously one of the guys had told everyone that I, at aged 11 in year 7, had said that. And so my experience of school suddenly changed overnight, and it suddenly became the most dangerous place. But I didn't back away, really. I managed to find a couple of amazing, theatre, it was acting really, and theatre, and being a nerd. I had we were obsessed with making little videos, me and my best mate. But yeah, I snogged loads of women. Well, not women, but obviously my peers. And I tried to maneuver around that, but no, I just luckily I've always gravitated towards the authentic people, and they get you through. And actually, now it's about how do I let people know of that age that they're going to be okay, because that's what I needed. Yeah. And that's why representation, I do think, really matters. But yeah, so we sound probably quite similar to Tim and Hawk. I think I was always, yeah.
Fellow Travelers is airing now. New episodes available Friday on Paramount Plus with Showtime. It's absolutely an extraordinary show that's sexy and funny and absolutely, with that spoiler alert, shattering. The last episode, so many great episodes. Matt asked me before which episodes really struck me the most, and it's just impossible to pinpoint the best part of it. It's really an extraordinary show. Thank you so much, Jonathan Bailey. Thank you, Matt Bomer. Congratulations on it. Good luck with Maestro. Good luck with Wicked.
Thank you.
So many other things we've got going on. Fellow Travelers, new episodes available Fridays. Paramount Plus with Showtime.